The morning light crept through the half-open curtains of Giulia Mancini's room as though it didn't want to disturb her, but the empty side of the bed did that on its own. The pillow beside her was untouched, cold, perfectly shaped, an outline of a presence that had never really belonged to anyone. She stared at it for a moment, her breath rising in the soft quiet, as if that single empty space had finally decided to remind her of everything she didn't say out loud. Downstairs, the metallic hum of tattoo machines waited for her like a heartbeat she had built with her own hands. That shop, ink-filled air, lavender disinfectant, walls covered in art, was the closest thing to a relationship she had kept steady. But even that steadiness couldn't stop the way her chest tightened every morning at the sight of that untouched pillow. Giulia, 27, olive skin warmed by California's sun, long brown hair usually tied in a loose knot, moved through the room with the quiet precision of someone who relied on motion to keep from thinking too much. She pulled on black jeans, slid her arms into a soft worn jacket still carrying the faint scent of leather and street air, and gathered her hair behind her neck. Her eyes, green, sharp, alive, lingered one last second on the empty space before she shut the door behind her. Outside, the sky was streaked with a cool silver light, promising heat later. The motorcycle she loved more than most people leaned against the curb, shining with leftover night. She ran her thumb on the chrome handle and brushed a bit of dust away, feeling the familiar weight settle in her chest. Freedom often looked like this: metal, sunrise, and no one expecting her home. Across the city, Ava Montgomery was staring at a different kind of emptiness. The credits of a documentary continued to roll on her laptop, though she hadn't watched the last 20 minutes. The room around her was bright, filled with plants and scattered notes, yet something felt strangely silent, like a pause that didn't know how to resolve itself. Ava, 21, with sun-kissed skin, medium height, and golden hair pulled loosely over one shoulder, closed the screen with a sigh. She reached for her backpack, brushing a thumb over a sticker of a vintage motorcycle she had put on the front pocket years ago. She loved machines that roared and roads that stretched endlessly. She loved stories with twists and adrenaline. But most of all, she loved the unexpected. And she was starting to feel that her life was craving exactly that. When Matthew, her friend from Caltech, gentle, brilliant, hopelessly unaware of the immediacy of life, texted her asking if they could finish their joint project at his place, she agreed quickly. It felt better than being alone with her restless thoughts. Besides, Matthew always made her laugh in that earnest, fumbling way of his. She arrived at the address he sent a little after 4 in the afternoon. The Californian sun had started to mellow, casting warm amber light over the 2-story building with a painted sign that read, Mancini INK Studio. She smiled at the name, imagining Matthew living above a tattoo shop. It didn't suit him at all. But what stopped her, mid-step, was the motorcycle parked in front. A custom build. Black with chrome linings. Low seat. Wide handlebars. The kind of bike someone rode to feel alive. Ava felt something spark beneath her ribcage, memory, longing, the warmth of childhood Sundays riding behind her father. She brushed her hair back, letting her fingers linger near her neck as though the thought alone had warmed her skin. "I didn't know you had a bike," she said when Matthew opened the door. He blinked, adjusting his glasses. "Me? No. I can barely manage a bicycle." Her eyes widened, disappointed but still curious. "Then whose is it?" The answer stepped into the doorway like a scene framed by fate. Giulia descended the small staircase from the studio, helmet under her arm, hair still tousled from the ride. She wasn't smiling, but her presence carried the same weight of sunlight hitting metal. Her eyes landed on Ava with a question she wasn't asking aloud. Ava forgot, for a moment, how to breathe. Giulia raised the helmet slightly. "Sorry, didn't mean to block the door." "You must be Ava." Her voice was low, warm, with that slight rasp of someone who talks while sketching or thinking deeply. It wrapped itself around Ava's senses before she even had time to understand why. "This is my sister, Julia," Matthew said, stepping back. "She owns the tattoo studio downstairs." Julia's gaze lingered, not rude, not bold, just present. "You like bikes?" Ava nodded, though the gesture felt too small for the sudden rush inside her. "My dad used to ride. I grew up loving them." Julia's smile was barely there, but unmistakably real. "Want a quick ride before you two start studying?" Matthew looked startled. I mean, sure. If Ava wants." Ava didn't answer Matthew. She answered Julia, with her eyes, with the way her pulse quickened, with the part of herself that always chased what felt alive. "I'd love to." The motorcycle roared to life beneath them, the vibration rising through Ava's body as she wrapped her arms around Julia's waist, not tightly, cautiously, as though touching a flame for the first time. She felt the heat of Julia's skin under the jacket, the faint aroma of leather mixed with something floral that she couldn't name but wanted to memorize. As they turned onto the main road, the wind tugged at Ava's hair. The city blurred, the temperature changed, the sound deepened. Ava closed her eyes for a second, letting sensation wash over her, warmth at her chest, the soft slide of her hands adjusting on Julia's waist, the crisp smell of asphalt and distant ocean. Something inside her settled and awakened all at once. By the time they returned, the sun had dipped lower, filling the sky with a golden glow that framed the studio's windows. Julia helped her off the bike with a hand at her elbow, a touch so light that it shouldn't have meant anything, yet it traveled through Ava's arm like a secret. Matthew called them from the door. "Ava! The notes are ready." She took a breath, steadying herself before heading inside. The studio smelled like ink and eucalyptus. Sketches covered the walls, each one an echo of the artist's mind. Ava paused near a set of designs pinned to a corkboard: wings, flowers, a woman's silhouette traced with delicate lines. Julia noticed. "That one's new. Haven't shown it to anyone yet." "It's beautiful," Ava murmured, fingers hovering close to the drawing but not touching. "It feels like it could fly off the wall." "Maybe it just needs the right skin," Julia replied, voice dipping slightly, as though the words held more weight than she intended. Ava lifted her gaze. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, subtle, warm, almost frightening in its clarity. The moment stretched. Matthew shifted a stack of textbooks loudly, and the connection snapped, but not fully. Just enough that both women stepped back without truly leaving the moment behind. Julia cleared her throat, brushing hair behind her ear. "You two study. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." Ava nodded, but when Julia walked past her, the air moved with her, warm and charged. Ava felt the faint brush of fabric against her arm, accidental or not, she couldn't tell. And when Ava finally sat beside Matthew to work, she caught herself glancing toward the stairs, wondering why her heart was beating in a rhythm she didn't recognize. Julia paused at the bottom step, turned slightly, and looked back up toward the living room, toward Ava. Only for a second. But Ava felt it everywhere. A question hung in the air between them, unspoken, hovering like a held breath neither dared release just yet. What now? The late afternoon light slanted through the studio windows, catching flecks of dust in the air like drifting gold. Ava had been staring at the same line of code on her laptop for almost 10 minutes, pretending to work while her attention kept drifting toward the sound of pencil on paper coming from the table behind her. Julia was sketching something, she didn't know what, because each time she glanced over, Julia shifted the page slightly, protective the way artists often were with unfinished thoughts. Matthew had left an hour earlier to pick up equipment from campus, leaving a quiet that felt both comfortable and charged. The building hummed faintly from the cooling machines downstairs. A faint breeze came through the open window, carrying the scent of someone grilling nearby, mixed with eucalyptus from the tiny plant Julia insisted on keeping beside the stairs. Ava exhaled, feeling the warmth of the day on her skin. Julia's voice broke the silence. You're very focused. Ava turned, cheeks warming. I'm pretending to be. Julia smiled without looking up from the sketch. I could tell. You don't have the lost in numbers face Matthew gets. What kind of face do I have then? Julia finally lifted her gaze. Those green eyes caught Ava in place. The "my mind is somewhere else entirely" face. A laugh threatened to escape Ava, but it stuck in her throat when Julia stood and crossed the room, holding the sketchpad against her hip. Her jacket was off now, leaving only a fitted charcoal tank top and dark jeans, and the air around her smelled faintly of ink and something floral, maybe whatever she washed her hair with. She stopped beside Ava's chair, leaning one hand on the backrest. Want a break? You look like you're melting into the keyboard. I might be, Ava admitted. The sun is hitting right here. Then move. Julia nudged the chair with her knee, the motion gentle but intimate in a way that made Ava's pulse shift. She helped pull the chair closer to the table, stepping behind Ava. For a moment, her fingers brushed the edge of the chair, barely grazing Ava's shoulder. Ava felt the warmth of that brief contact travel down her arm. Julia walked back to her desk. Matthew will take hours. He always overthinks every item on a shopping list. Ava grinned. True. So, we could get dinner while we wait. If you want. A simple offer, but there was something underneath it, something Ava couldn't name. She said yes before thinking twice. They ended up in the studio kitchen, really just a small space with a fridge, a narrow counter, and a mismatched collection of mugs and bowls that looked like they'd been acquired from yard sales and artists who never took their own pottery home. Julia opened the fridge and pulled out ingredients without ceremony: tomatoes, basil, a block of fresh mozzarella. We could order something, Ava offered. I like cooking. Makes the place feel less like a workspace. The knife hit the cutting board in soft, rhythmic sounds. Ava watched her from the doorway, the warm kitchen light catching on Julia's tattoos as she moved, black ink swirling over her arms like stories etched into skin. The scent of sliced tomatoes mixed with basil and the faint tang of olive oil, filling the small room with warmth that seeped into Ava's chest. Hand me the salt. Julia asked. Ava stepped closer, reaching past her to grab it. Their arms brushed, just a subtle slide of skin, but enough to pull a quiet breath from both of them. Ava placed the salt beside Julia's hand, fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary. Julia didn't look up, but the corner of her mouth curved. You always take your time. She murmured. Only when I want to. Julia's gaze finally lifted, sharp and amused. Good to know. They ate at the small wooden table by the window, plates warm against their palms, the setting sun turning everything a soft honey gold. Outside, the street hummed with quiet evening activity, someone walking a dog, distant music from a passing car, the flutter of leaves on the sidewalk. Inside, there was only the occasional scrape of fork on ceramic, the soft rustle of clothing when one of them shifted. Ava felt strangely comfortable. More than that, seen. So, this place, Ava gestured at the studio beneath them. It's impressive. You built all of this? Julia nodded, chewing thoughtfully before answering. Yeah. After art school, I didn't want to work for anyone. I wanted something that felt like mine. Something I could breathe in. Ava looked at her more closely. Does it ever feel lonely? Julia's fork paused midair. Sometimes. Freedom has its quiet nights. The honesty in those words caught Ava off guard. She wanted to ask more, but she sensed that Julia had already shared more than she intended. Before either of them could speak again, the faint buzz of Julia's phone vibrated on the counter. She checked it quickly, her expression cooling. I might have to go to LA this weekend, she said, setting the phone down. A client from a gallery wants to see new designs. It's kind of last minute. Ava swallowed, surprised by the unexpected knot in her stomach. For how long? Just 2 days. But, it's the kind of thing that could shift my schedule. There it was, the obstacle sliding quietly into place. Work. Distance. Timing. The kind of thing that separated people before they even had the chance to figure out what they were becoming. Ava nodded lightly. Sounds important. Julia shrugged, but her eyes were somewhere between frustration and acceptance. It is. But I'll manage. They continued eating, though the conversation slowed. The sunlight dimmed, the room cooling with the arrival of evening. Julia stood to gather plates, but Ava reached out first, fingers brushing the edge of Julia's hand. Julia stopped. The contact was small, barely there. But it held something neither of them said. I can clean, Ava whispered, her voice softer than she meant it to be. Julia didn't pull her hand away. We can both do it. So they stood side by side at the sink, rinsing dishes in warm water. Their shoulders touched occasionally, sending tiny sparks under Ava's skin. The window above the sink let in a cooler breeze, carrying the distant sound of a dog barking, mixing with the soft splash of water and the warm scent of dish soap. Julia handed Ava a plate to dry, fingers brushing hers, just a slide of touch, drifting slowly before pulling back as if dragging time with it. Ava's breath caught, her heart beating a little too hard. Julia noticed. She always noticed. You okay? Julia asked softly. Ava nodded, though her voice faltered. Yeah. Just, warm in here. Is it? Julia stepped just a little closer, enough that Ava could feel the heat from her skin. Ava looked up, eyes meeting hers. Maybe it's not the room. Julia's gaze dropped for a brief moment to Ava's mouth, not a full second, but enough to make Ava inhale sharply. Julia whispered. If I weren't leaving this weekend. Her sentence didn't finish. Ava felt her body tilt forward instinctively, drawn by the gravity between them. Julia's hand lifted slightly, brushing the back of her fingers against Ava's arm, a ghost of a touch, deliberate but hesitant, like the start of a confession. A voice sounded at the bottom of the stairs. I'm back. Matthew called loudly. You won't believe the chaos I just went through. Julia stepped back, dropping her hand. Ava looked away, steadying her breath. The moment dissolved into the hum of footsteps climbing the stairs. But something had shifted. Something had been promised, even if neither dared to claim it yet. Julia leaned close enough for only Ava to hear. After the trip, we'll finish this conversation. Ava felt the warmth of those words settle where Julia's fingers had almost held her. I'll be here, she whispered back. Matthew's return shifted the air, but it didn't truly break the current between Ava and Julia. It just forced it underground, where it hummed with a quieter, deeper pulse. The three of them moved through the living room as if nothing unusual had happened in the kitchen moments earlier, yet every time Ava felt Julia's presence near her, her breath tightened. Matthew talked endlessly about traffic and how the equipment store mixed his order, though neither woman caught more than a handful of words. Ava sat on the couch, her laptop open but forgotten, and Julia leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely, listening with that half-smirk she used whenever Matthew became adorably dramatic. But her eyes kept drifting back to Ava. And Ava felt every one of those looks like a warm hand on her collarbone. Eventually, Matthew announced he was heading downstairs to sort the materials, leaving the two women in a silence that felt like an unfinished sentence. Julia pushed away from the wall. You're still not concentrating. Ava tried to laugh. Maybe I'm just tired. Julia walked closer, not rushed, not with swagger, but with purpose. Her steps were soft against the wooden floor, a faint knock with each heel, like distant drumming. She stopped beside Ava, the light from the overhead lamp outlining the subtle gold flecks in her green eyes. Or maybe, Julia said, voice low, "Your mind is somewhere else again." Ava didn't answer. She didn't need to. The quiet that followed was filled with something both of them felt. Julia sat on the couch beside her, close enough that their thighs almost touched. The sofa cushions dipped slightly under her weight, and the small shift brought Ava an inch nearer. She felt the warmth of Julia's body radiating through the thin fabric of her shirt. Julia leaned forward, taking the laptop gently from Ava's lap. "Let's put this away before you erase the entire project by accident." Their fingers brushed, a deliberate, feather-light caress that lingered just half a heartbeat longer than casual contact would allow. Ava's skin warmed instantly, her breath tightening. Julia noticed. She always noticed. The evening stretched into a softness neither expected. They ended up in the studio downstairs after Matthew went out for dinner with a friend. Julia claimed she needed to reorganize her tools before the LA trip, though Ava couldn't help but suspect the timing wasn't coincidence. The lights were dimmer here, warmer, small hanging bulbs that glowed like tiny suns. The scent of ink and disinfectant filled the air, mixed with something floral from the candle on the counter. Ava wandered the room slowly, touching the edges of frames, tracing the line of a design pinned to the wall. "You really love these," Julia said, watching Ava with quiet curiosity. "They feel alive. Like they're trying to tell me something." Julia stepped behind her, close enough that Ava felt the soft exhale of her breath against her shoulder. "What do you think this one says?" Julia asked, pointing to a drawing of a woman's back, a line of flowers blooming along her spine. Ava studied it. "It looks like someone learning to trust their own body again." Julia's gaze flicked to her. "Interesting interpretation. What was yours?" Julia hesitated. Then, "That she's done apologizing for wanting what she wants." Ava's heart skipped. Julia reached for another sketch on the table, a delicate one, unfinished. "I started this earlier. Before dinner." She held it out, and when Ava reached for it, Julia didn't let go right away. Their fingertips overlapped on the edge of the paper, a gentle but definite contact that sent a warm shiver up Ava's arm. "It's beautiful," Ava murmured. "You haven't even looked at it." Julia's lips curved slightly. Ava lifted her eyes, and Julia's were already waiting for them. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single breath. Ava could feel Julia's warmth, her perfume, subtle, faintly sweet, hovering between them. She wondered how someone could look both strong and uncertain at once. Julia let go of the sketch. "Take a closer look." Ava did. It was the outline of a woman sitting with her knees drawn up, hair falling over one shoulder. The pose was soft, vulnerable, intimate. Ava's voice was almost a whisper. "She looks safe." Julia's throat moved as she swallowed. "I wasn't thinking of safety. But maybe I should have been." Ava looked up again. Julia was closer. Too close. The space between them shifted in subtle ways. Julia reached over Ava's shoulder to grab a brush from the table, her arm grazing the fabric of Ava's shirt. The contact was unhurried, deliberate in its slowness. Ava inhaled sharply, and Julia froze for a fraction of a second, sensing the change in her breathing. When Julia pulled back, her fingers brushed Ava's hair, accidentally, or not. Ava didn't move. The soft slide of those fingers against her neck felt like a question waiting for an answer. "Julia," Ava began, her voice unsteady. "You can tell me to stop anytime," Julia said gently. Ava shook her head, eyes bright. "I don't want you to stop." The confession hung between them like warm air before a storm. Julia's face changed, not into a smile, but into something deeper, something vulnerable. She stepped closer, so close Ava could feel the heat radiating from her body. Her hand lifted, slowly, deliberately, and hovered near Ava's cheek but didn't touch. Ava leaned in, barely, just enough that Julia's fingertips finally brushed her skin. The touch was soft, trembling with intention. Ava's breath hitched. Julia exhaled, warm and unsteady. They stood like that for moments that felt endless, breaths mixing, palms brushing, eyes searching, neither daring to close the distance fully. Ava's heart thudded loudly, and Julia's thumb traced the faintest line along the edge of her jaw. The tender glide made Ava's lips part just slightly. Julia started leaning in. Ava matched her, instinctively. Their foreheads brushed. Noses touched softly. Julia's hand moved to Ava's waist, light but certain. Ava closed her eyes. And then Julia stopped. Her breath was right there, warm, trembling, touching Ava's mouth without fully kissing it. The restraint burned through Ava's spine. Julia whispered, "If I kiss you, it won't be small." Ava's answer came out in a breath. "Then let it be what it is." Julia's resolve faltered. And she kissed her. Softly. Tentatively. Just once, lips brushing lips, warm and searching, like two people discovering the same truth at the same time. It tasted like something new trying to bloom before either woman could name it. The kiss ended quickly, but the echo of it vibrated through Ava's entire body. Julia stepped back, eyes wide, almost startled by her own courage. Ava stared at her, chest rising fast, fingers trembling slightly at her sides. Julia shook her head, voice soft and conflicted. "I shouldn't have done that." "Why?" Ava asked, breathless. "Because I'm leaving tomorrow. Because I don't know where this goes. Because you deserve something that isn't temporary." Ava felt the words hit her like cool air after warmth. "You think I don't get to choose what I want?" Julia looked away. "I'm afraid of wanting too much." A silence hung between them, thick, warm, painful in its sweetness. Ava took a step forward, but Julia moved one back. "Not tonight," Julia whispered. "Not when I'm leaving." The studio's lights flickered slightly as the AC kicked in, stirring a cooler breeze that brushed against their heated skin. The moment that had been building for days fractured with the shift in air. Ava wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her breathing. Julia stood by the table, one hand gripping its edge as if grounding herself. Neither knew what to say. Finally, Julia exhaled shakily. "After the trip, maybe we can talk. Figure out what this is." Ava nodded slowly, though her heart was a storm. "Come back soon." Julia gave one last look, soft, longing, almost apologetic, before turning away. Ava watched her go, feeling the warmth of that single kiss burning on her lips long after the door closed. Julia didn't sleep the night before her trip. She paced the length of her room, the dim bedside lamp casting shifting shadows over the sketches taped to the wall. The air was thick with the scent of lavender from the candle she'd blown out hours ago, but its warmth lingered, just like the memory of Ava's lips against hers. She touched her mouth unconsciously, as if verifying that the moment had really happened. The pillow beside her remained untouched, cool. The same emptiness she woke to every morning, yet tonight it felt heavier, like she'd let someone in just enough to feel the void widen. Downstairs, she heard Matthew moving boxes, preparing for the weekend without realizing anything had changed. But something had changed. Everything had. She sat on the edge of her bed, elbows resting on her knees, staring at the crack of light beneath the door. Part of her wanted to walk down the hall to Ava's room. Knock once. Say everything. Or say nothing and just exist in the quiet with her. Instead, she stayed where she was, breath shallow, palms warm. She whispered into the stillness. "What am I doing?" But no room, no wall, no sketch answered. Ava didn't sleep either. She lay in the guest room, staring at the faint reflection of city lights on the ceiling, fingers brushing the edge of the borrowed blanket. The soft scent of eucalyptus from the studio below drifted upward through the vents. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Julia's hand at her waist again, Julia's breath warming her lips, Julia's uncertainty pressed into that single brief kiss. Her chest tightened with equal parts thrill and fear. She hated this part, this edge between knowing and not knowing. Between wanting and being afraid of wanting too much. She finally sat up, pulling her knees close. Maybe she should talk to Julia. Maybe she should walk down the hall, knock, whisper her name. But what would she say? Please don't leave. Please don't walk away from what this could be. Ava's throat tightened. Her heart pressed against her ribs like it was fighting to get out. She stood, barefoot on the cold wooden floor, and approached the door. She held the knob for a second too long, listening to the silent corridor on the other side. Her fingers turned the metal halfway, just enough for a soft click. The door creaked open a fraction. But she didn't step through. She closed it again. The decision stayed suspended in her chest like breath she couldn't release. Julia left early. Ava heard the front door downstairs sometime close to dawn, followed by the low rumble of the motorcycle starting. The sound vibrated through the walls, a mechanical heartbeat she was already associating with Julia. Ava sat in bed, hugging her pillow, listening as the engine faded down the street. It felt like a thread pulling away from her, stretching and stretching until she wasn't sure if it had snapped or if she was the one who let go. Downstairs, Matthew knocked gently an hour later. Ava? You awake? She cleared her throat. Yeah, come in. He stepped inside, holding a mug of coffee with both hands like it might spill with any sudden movement. Julia left really early, he said slowly, watching her with an expression more careful than usual. She didn't even take breakfast. Ava nodded, pretending the information didn't land like a cold drop of rain down her spine. She had that meeting in LA, right? Yeah, Matthew said. She looked different this morning. He waited, as if expecting Ava to reveal something. She didn't. He sighed and handed her the coffee. You're both weird today. She smiled despite herself. Maybe it's contagious. When Matthew left, Ava stared at the steam curling above the mug. The movement reminded her of breath, of warmth shared between two people standing too close. She closed her eyes, letting the scent of the coffee settle around her. Julia had kissed her. That was real. And now she was gone. LA brought no peace to Julia. The gallery was crowded with noise, the harsh brightness of track lights bouncing off sculptures and glass installations. Her portfolio lay open on the table as the client talked about exciting possibilities, but the words blended into a blur. Julia's phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't check it. Not immediately. She sat through another half hour of forced enthusiasm before excusing herself to the restroom. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights turned her skin pale, and the cold tile pressed against her back as she leaned against the wall. Only then did she look at her phone. A message from Ava. Hope the meeting's going well. Julia stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard. What am I supposed to say? She whispered. She typed something, deleted it. Typed again, deleted again. Her pulse felt too loud. Her breath uneven. The only thing she finally sent was, "It's fine. Talk later." Short. Safe. Too safe. She hated it the moment it delivered. Ava reread the message a dozen times. The room at Matthew's place felt too quiet, too still, as though something important had stepped out with Julia that morning and hadn't returned. She placed her phone face down on the table beside her. The studio downstairs hummed faintly through the floorboards, a distant, familiar sound that made her chest hurt. She wandered around, tracing the edge of Julia's work table, touching a brush, a sketch, a coil of silver wire Julia used for stencils. Every object felt charged with her presence. Her scent seemed to linger, faintly floral, warm, unmistakably hers. Ava found herself standing before the half-finished drawing Julia showed her the day before, the woman curled inward, delicate lines folding around her like protective wings. Ava whispered. "You left before I could ask what you really meant." The drawing didn't answer, but somehow, Ava felt seen. By evening, Julia sat alone in her hotel room, back against the headboard, the dull hum of city traffic outside her window. She had showered, but she still smelled faintly of the gallery, metallic air, perfume from people she didn't know, the sharp tang of nervous sweat. She hated hotel rooms. They always felt like temporary versions of a life she didn't want. On the nightstand, her phone vibrated once. A photo. From Matthew. Ava in the studio, bathed in the warm overhead lights, studying one of Julia's drawings with a look so gentle it made Julia's throat tighten. Matthew's message under it. "She's been down here for an hour. Not touching anything. Just looking." Julia closed her eyes. Pain and longing intertwined, pulling at her ribcage like they couldn't decide whether to tighten or break open. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard again, trembling. She typed, "Tell her I'll call." Deleted it. Typed, "I miss." Deleted it. Typed, "I shouldn't have kissed her." Stopped. Breath caught. She stared at those words. Then she erased them too. Finally she sent nothing at all. She let the phone drop onto the mattress beside her, then pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead. Why is this so hard? Outside, the city lights flickered like restless stars. Inside, the room felt colder. The next morning, Ava almost didn't go downstairs. But Matthew knocked on her door carrying a box of pastries, his face lit with excitement about something she barely understood. When she followed him into the studio, she froze. The half-finished drawing was gone from the table. In its place was a blank sheet of paper. Matthew noticed her confusion. "Oh, yeah. Julia took some of her pieces for the gallery. Said she needed them." Ava's heart sank more than she wanted to admit. That sketch had felt like a thread connecting them. Now it was gone. Matthew watched her closely. "Are you okay?" Ava nodded, forcing a smile that felt thin and fragile. "Yeah. Just thinking." She turned away before he could ask anything else. Her eyes drifted to the door leading outside. The afternoon sun painted a line of light across the floorboards, bright and sharp, like an invitation, or a warning. Ava reached into her pocket, fingers brushing her phone. A dozen messages she wanted to send formed in her mind. "Did you get home safe? I keep thinking about yesterday. What did that kiss mean to you? Please talk to me." But she typed none of them. The door creaked with the wind, opening an inch, then closing again, like a decision waiting to be made. She stared at it, chest tight. Later. After the trip. After courage found one of them first. She turned her phone face down. The message she hadn't written pressed itself into her thoughts like a held breath. Julia returned from LA on a Sunday evening, the kind of evening where the California sky looked washed clean, pale gold fading into lavender. The motorcycle rumbled beneath her as she approached the familiar block, but the sound felt different this time, less like freedom, more like a heartbeat guiding her back to something she had refused to name. She slowed in front of the studio, cut the engine, and listened to the sudden quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't still. It was expectant, as though the entire house held its breath. She rested her palms on the handlebars a moment longer, fingers trembling slightly from something that had nothing to do with the ride. She had spent the whole drive back arguing silently with herself, what she should say, what she shouldn't, what she might ruin by saying too much or too little. But as she stood there with the fading sunlight brushing her skin, the weight of the decision settled in her chest. She knew exactly what she needed to do. Inside, Matthew was sorting takeout boxes in the kitchen, humming to himself the way he did when he tried to distract from uncertainty. He heard the door open and peeked around the corner. "You're back early," he said. Julia nodded, setting her bag down. "The meeting ended sooner than I expected." Matthew hesitated before asking what he really wanted to know. "Did you talk to Ava?" Julia shook her head. "Not yet." He waited, searching her face the way only a sibling could. "You should." She exhaled sharply. "I know." But knowing didn't make it easier. A soft sound drifted from the studio downstairs, the faint scrape of paper against wood. Julia felt her pulse jump. She walked to the railing and looked down. Ava was there. She stood in the center of the tattoo studio, surrounded by sketches and scattered pencils, wearing a loose shirt that brushed her thighs and socks that didn't match. Her hair fell in soft waves, head bent as she examined something on the wall. One hand rested against her sternum, as though she was holding her own heartbeat steady. Julia descended the stairs quietly, but Ava sensed her anyway. She turned. Their eyes met. Something in the air shifted, warm and sharp at the same time. Neither spoke immediately. Words felt too small. Julia crossed the final steps until they stood a few feet apart. The studio smelled like eucalyptus and warm paper, and the single overhead bulb bathed Ava's skin in a soft golden glow. Julia took a slow breath. "I saw your message," she said, voice low but steady. "I just didn't know how to answer without lying." Ava's brows drew together. "Lying about what?" Julia swallowed, throat tight. "About pretending the kiss didn't mean anything." Ava let out a breath she had been holding for days. "It meant something to me too." Those words, gentle, honest, unguarded, struck Julia harder than she expected. She stepped closer, cautiously, like approaching something delicate. "I was scared," Julia admitted. "I still am." "Of what?" Ava whispered. Julia struggled for a moment, then let the truth out the way one exhales after holding something painful too long. "Of wanting something that might not want me back. Of wanting something that could change everything." Ava's expression softened. "You don't have to do it alone." Julia let out a breath that trembled on the way out. Ava took a small step forward, the kind of step that didn't force anything but invited everything. Her fingers lifted toward Julia's arm, stopping just before touching. A gesture of consent. A question. A promise. Julia nodded, barely, but unmistakably. Ava closed the distance. Her hand found Julia's forearm first, fingertips light as a feather tracing the inked line along her skin. Julia inhaled sharply, not from surprise but from recognition, of this touch, of this moment, of the truth she had been trying not to feel. Julia raised her hand to Ava's cheek, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The movement was slow, reverent. Ava leaned into the touch, eyes half-lidded, her breath warming Julia's wrist. Julia whispered. "I didn't sleep in LA." "Me neither," Ava confessed. The admission pulled something loose in Julia's chest. She stepped closer until the space between them was thin as breath. Ava's free hand slid toward Julia's waist, hovering, waiting. Julia guided it the rest of the way. Their foreheads touched. Quiet. Warm. Unsteady. The first kiss that followed was nothing like the one in the studio days earlier. It wasn't hesitant, wasn't unsure. It was soft, but certain. Slow, but deep enough to make both women forget the air around them. A kiss that didn't ask permission because it had already been given, a kiss that didn't need urgency because it had intent. Ava's lips brushed Julia's like a confession. Julia responded with the gentlest pressure, her fingers sliding behind Ava's neck. Their breaths mixed, creating a warmth that grew from the center of their chests outward. Ava's hands moved to Julia's waist, her thumbs tracing slow circles on the fabric of her shirt, savoring the quiet closeness. Julia guided her backward until Ava's back touched the wall lightly. The world narrowed to fingertips, warm breath, the soft glide of mouths learning each other. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. Everything chosen. When they finally parted, their noses brushed, breaths mingling in a warm cloud between them. Ava opened her eyes slowly. So, what now? Julia rested her forehead against hers. Now we stop running from whatever this is. Ava laughed softly, breathless. I didn't know you were running. I was practically sprinting, Julia said, smiling for the first time in days. But I'm tired of pretending I'm not curious about the way you make me feel. A silence followed, comfortable, charged, sweet. A silence that felt like a doorway. But reality pressed in, soft yet undeniable. Julia sighed, brushing her thumb across Ava's cheek. This is still scary. Ava pressed a gentle kiss to Julia's palm. Most things worth choosing are. Those words landed deep in Julia's chest, shifting something that had been locked for years. She pulled Ava into a slow embrace. Their bodies fit with surprising ease, not perfect, not polished, but real. Ava tucked her face into Julia's neck, breathing in the warm scent of cedar and ink. Julia wrapped her arms around her, pressing her lips softly to Ava's hair. And for the first time in a long time, Julia felt something she hadn't expected to find with anyone: belonging. Later, they climbed the stairs without speaking, drawn by the softness of the moment. When they reached Julia's room, she paused at the doorway. The last of the sunlight filtered through the curtains, the same pale streaks that had lit the empty side of her bed in the opening days of her story. Only now, the room didn't feel empty. Julia looked at the bed, at the once untouched pillow, and then at Ava. Ava stepped forward, her hand brushing Julia's, fingers intertwining with quiet certainty. No rush. No pressure. Just presence. They lay down together, not in urgency, but in comfort. Ava rested her head on Julia's shoulder, fingers tracing slow lines along her arm. Julia closed her eyes, letting the warmth of Ava's body soften every sharp corner inside her. Their kisses were slow, tender, filled with the promise of something real. Touches lingered, exploring the edges of intimacy without crossing into anything explicit, breaths shared, skin brushing, warmth gathering between them like a gentle fire. It was less an act and more a surrender, a moment shaped not by desire alone but by trust. Ava whispered against her neck. I'm here, Julia. Really here. Julia exhaled shakily, brushing her lips against Ava's temple. Then maybe I can stop waking up to an empty bed. Ava lifted her head, eyes soft. You don't have to wake up alone anymore. Julia's throat tightened, not with fear, but with relief. This time, when she looked at the pillow beside her, it no longer represented absence. It represented possibility. Love, she realized, wasn't about certainty. It was about courage, the quiet kind, the kind that asks you to open the door even when your hands tremble. We're so glad you made it this far. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Secret Garden Stories, leaving a comment, and sharing it with friends, forums, and social media. Your support helps this channel grow and build a world with more love and less prejudice. Tulip. Thank you for being here.